what is it about sexuality and sensuality and things of the like that seems to, based on what you're suggesting, in your work with people, like going kind of like deeper into the subconscious and the psycho-emotional planes, kind of like the hardwiring of a person. What is it about that allows a person to be opened up in those ways to potentially be like reconfigured and healed, if that language is okay for folks?
It's true. No, because quite often when people are like, well, what is kink? What does that even mean? I say it's being turned on by the taboo, or not only what you consider to be taboo, but maybe society or your religion or your community. And when people are taking this usually well-worn path of their sexuality, which is very conventional, there's not a lot to be gained and learned in that situation, because people at that stage are using sex like they use fast food. I'm hungry. I'm going to go get some In-N-Out burger. That's easy. Let me just, quench that desire for a moment so I can get on with my life. But I like In-N-Out burger every once in a while, but I don't want to live off of In-N-Out burger. And people sometimes don't even know that there is this gourmet experience to the erotic. And when we actually push our boundaries and push our edges, there's so much growth and learning that can happen in that place, because just by the nature of doing something that we don't normally do and taking risks and being daring in our most vulnerable state, there's so much learning that can happen. It really can be such a paradigm shift for people. Very similar when they do medicine journeys with psilocybin and MDMA, doing an intense erotic scene that you create with a trusted partner can have that expanded, altered state of consciousness where you might feel the sense of unconditional love. You might see life from a different perspective. It might be a pattern interrupt, and it also might open you up to the possibility of seeing, a higher power or your higher self, depending on your belief systems.
What does that actually look like? I never heard the term scene other than listening to you talk about
the scene.
Yeah. This.
Yeah.
Apparently the podcast studio seems like a scene from what you said when you came in. You're like, this is like a dump set.
I know. I walked in and I was like, ooh, is this just for me?
This is just for you.
When you pull back the curtain, is it like a wall of floggers?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, what's going on behind that curtain?
So what if you were taking me through a scene, if that's the appropriate language?
Sure.
What does that look like? I come into you, I'm like, I've got some weird stuff with my dad, and I don't trust women, and I have insecurity around the size of my dong, and
so many issues.
Taking it out, and, all these different weird ways. How do I get a healing through the dom sub relationship, and what does it actually look like?
Yeah. So when I'm working with clients, or if I were working with you, for example, coming in and getting curious around what you want in life and what feels like it's standing in the way, and getting really curious about those things that are standing in the way, but not just like illuminating those things, but actually like saying, let's take those things, whether there's shame at play here or whether there's some limiting beliefs that need to be exposed. But instead of just talking about it, like, let's actually act them out. And like, let's have a bodily, visceral experience that incorporates the whole senses, all of your senses, your sexuality, all of these, all of these components, and let's have an experience that could be very drastically different than what you know to be true, that really challenges that limiting belief that's standing in the way of the success or the life that you want. So we can take that information, we can eroticize it, and we can play it out in these like really straight up terms, where if you're dealing with issues of, holding yourself back or shame, like we could go in one direction where I'm actually...
Let's do shame.
Say that again.
Let's do shame.
Let's do shame.
So let's say shame around sexuality. I have shame, like that's something that's just, I was indoctrinated into like some super religious background.
Totally.
Like any of
so
that
common.
Stuff. Yeah. I'm chronically clenching my butthole throughout the day.
And you're cutting off your life force in some sense.
I'm cutting off my life force.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a lot of different directions. So based on talking about your desires and your boundaries, what I would be interested in curating are a couple of experiences. Maybe one of the experiences is that if I were going to be the leader and you were going to be the follower, I could put you in a position where you're rendered in a more helpless state. So maybe that incorporates shibari. Like I literally physically, immobilize you. And I, use different techniques like sensation play or impact play to get you out of your head and into your body.
Sensation play means like little whiskers.
Could be.
Thing. Impact means spanking.
Exactly. And I want to just let you know that this is all on a scale. So there's a spectrum to all of this. Spanking could actually... People think it's going to be hardcore, but spanking could be done light and sensually and playfully. And something like dirty talk, where people are like, oh, that's light. Well, I could do dirty talk super hardcore and intense. So we'd get really curious around what intensity level you're available for.
What does dirty talk mean?
That's like I rip your whole life apart.
Wow.
Like you have
humiliation.
Total humiliation, degradation. Wow. You're just dirt underneath my boot.
Could you humiliate me?
I could easily humiliate you.
Could you humiliate me in this podcast?
Well, this is the thing, though, because I could do some stereotypical cliche ideas of what humiliation is and say some words and phrases to you, but until I really understand you and your psyche, which is going to take some conversations, like it would take an intake process, because I really want to know what are some of your sensitive points, and I would learn that by getting a better picture of your childhood and how you grew up in the household and what your perception of life is.
So you'd bring it to the surface in like an extreme way.
I could sit here and be like, you're a piece of shit, and and it probably is going to not make any difference to you ultimately, because you're like, oh, okay, sure. But
you need something that actually,
the idea,
I actually have humiliation around.
There's nothing more powerful than making somebody doubt themselves. So the idea would be like getting curious around what are your real life fears and doubts and things that maybe exist and don't always get a lot of attention because they're parts of ourselves we don't like to look at. And what happens if we really pull those out? And you know what else I would say, Erin? I would say, I could sit here and say all these words to you, but I could never humiliate you the way you probably can humiliate yourself. And the mean things and the mean thoughts and the things that we do to ourselves, I can never compare to something like that. So if anything, maybe I'd stick you in front of the mirror and I'd say, I want to watch you humiliate yourself.
Wow.
Like, let me see you do it and let yourself see what you're saying to yourself out loud, and I'm going to hold space and witness it.
Wow.
That could be a totally different way of humiliation as opposed to you're a dirty piece of shit. Like that's basic. That's really surfacey kind of stuff. And I'm more interested in really getting into the heart and soul of something so we can expose it and we can bring consciousness to it so we can have choice around it ultimately.